Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I'm going to show you how to make this crazy quilt card, and it's a lot of fun using some very simple techniques and stamps from our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com. I'll have all the products that I used linked up below and a coupon code to save you 20% off all stamps at Rubber Stamp Tapestry. So you're going to need some cardstock and some Post-it notes for this, or some low-tack masking tape. The reason you need that is because you're going to be portioning off parts of your card. Since I want to do a crazy quilt, I'm starting in the center by kind of just portioning off like a trapezoid type shape. Now I want to use pumpkins. I want this to be kind of like a fall themed, maybe Halloween card. I didn't have a pumpkin stamp, can you believe it? So I am using this juicy apple stamp, and I am stamping it with orange and red, so that way I get kind of those pumpkin looks. And I'll show you another way that I give it a little bit of a pumpkin feel later. To get the background color of my fabric, I am using a blending brush, and I really recommend that over a sponge in this instance because you're going to get a soft color. And when in doubt, go tone on tone, and that's going to give you a beautiful fabric look, and it's a lot easier and there's no guesswork. To make my apples look like pumpkins, I'm using a wet watercolor brush to just kind of paint on the little ribs, and that'll just give you a natural highlight and it will look just like a pumpkin. To add a little bit more pumpkin spice to this little quilt square, I am using an olive green Tombow marker to draw some curly vines, because you know pumpkins are on vines. And I had just about the perfect peg stamp that looked like a pumpkin leaf. I think it's actually a grape leaf, but it looks very much like a pumpkin leaf. So I'm using that to stamp on the vine to make it look extra pumpkin-y. So let that be a lesson to you to use what you have. Even though I didn't have a pumpkin stamp, I made do, and I made a really cool section of this card. So think about what you have in your stash that can be used whenever you don't have exactly the right thing for a project. So now we're going to remove our Post-it notes and see our centerpiece of fabric. So if you've ever crazy quilted before, you know you kind of start from the middle and you work out. So that's what we're going to do here. So now I am going off that block, and I am masking off a section next to it. Don't forget to put a piece of Post-it note over the piece you just stamped because you don't want to get ink on that. And then pick another stamp, pick another color, and get to work on your next block. I'm going to speed things up here because it will get a little repetitive, and then you'll be able to see how I put the whole thing together. It's up to you whether you want to use the blending brushes first to put your background in, or if you want to put your images in first. It's completely up to you. What I like to do is a tone on tone, so if I'm using the same pad for blushing in the color as well as stamping, it really doesn't matter. In fact, I think I like to do the brushing in a little first. So just remember, after you do a block, you just mask off another chunk, and you keep on adding color and adding stamping. Working like this is very much how quilters do crazy quilts, building off from the center, but you don't have to keep things like fabric directions and how they'd come off of the next piece in mind quite so much. All you got to do is make sure you can mask right up against it, and just make sure you keep covering the images you just inked so you don't end up smearing. You also might want to make notice, and I kept reusing my Post-it notes and didn't have a problem, but if you are putting a Post-it note down on top of a freshly inked area, you might just want to look on the back of that Post-it note before you stick it anywhere else in case there's some ink on there, because I guess it could smear. But since we don't have white backgrounds, everything has some inking on it, I think even if you did have a little bit of ink transference, it really wouldn't be a big deal. I didn't think that the bats showed up really well on the black inked area, so I did black bats over the purple inked area just for a little bit more of a bold design. And I just made sure that I kept with the same ink families. I kept using the same colors of ink over and over again, but I didn't have two blocks with the same background fabric color next to each other. That just allowed me to have some nice contrast throughout the design. And we're almost done here. We can see the finished crazy quilt block. And you can do this with any theme. It doesn't have to be Halloween. You could do it with Christmas. You could do it with any occasion, and it would just be gorgeous. So what I'm doing here is I took a little paper piercer, and I am just going along the areas where the fabric would meet so I can have some kind of stitching lines just to make it look a little bit more quilt-like. And then I am taking a black pen and just drawing down those stitching lines so it looks like you can see some visible thread. Of course, I guess if you were a really good quilter, you wouldn't see any stitching at all. Now we're going to flip over this panel onto our foam mat, and you can clearly see the sections of fabric, or faux fabric, whatever you want to call it. And what we're going to do is rub the back with some wax paper, and this is going to make our embossing tool glide across the back. If you don't have a large embossing tool like I am using here, you can use a marble or a rounded button, anything that you could press and rub in the center of each of these sections to make each piece look quilted, because it is kind of like a faux, quilt look we're going for. So you want to do that to every little section that you have on the back of this card. Now every quilt needs a binding, of course, so I am going to use our beloved washi tape to make the binding for our quilt. And what you want to do is just take your narrowest washi tape, and well, you don't have to use a really narrow washi tape actually, you could just have it overhang a little bit more. I am putting it down on my paper so it covers about between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch of the paper. And I find doing this on the black mat actually really helps me see through the translucent tape where I have gone. And I like to do 2 sides, fold them over, and then do the 2 short sides. That way I can have a nice neat corner, because I can cut off the excess before I put on the other edges. I think this technique could lend itself to other crafting projects, such as like scrapbooking. If you did a long skinny strip of this type of technique, I think it would be a really pretty page title or page border, and it's a great way to use up some white scraps of cardstock. So now I have my pre-folded piece of cardstock for my card base, and here's where I'm going to give you some alternate advice to what I actually did. So what I did was I used my hot glue gun, and I kind of filled in the little wells of my quilting to kind of prop it up in behind, so that when it was glued to the card it wouldn't get crushed in the mail. I think what I would recommend you do is to use foam squares inside the wells, and then use some wet glue along the stitching, and I think that would give you a better look, and then you'd be less likely to burn your hands. Don't burn your hands off, use wet glue and use foam squares. I think that would just work a lot better. Also, I think that it would look nicer to have another border. So I think if I was to do this card again, I would make sure the quilted portion was about 1/2 an inch smaller than my card base, so that I would get a 1/4 inch border around that. And I just think that might look a little bit nicer. But it's a pretty card in any event, and I hope you give it a try. Of course, you could use any number of sentiments on this. Happy Halloween, happy fall, y'all, whatever you like. I'm just going to keep it blank for now, and I'll probably mail it to my mom because she's an avid quilter. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up, and if you want to find the products that I use, check out our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry, at pegstamps.com, and be sure to use a 20% off coupon code that will save you 20% off all stamps at pegstamps.com. Happy crafting!